for dramatic effect. Do it again for the audience who's now immediately tuned in. Dong.
There you go.
Anytime you say something heavy, just do that. What does mine sound like?
Thump.
Not as dramatic at all.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
All right, just grabbing the link to share.
Nice. I'm just gonna do what I always do and retweet or whatever your and
Okay.
Bluesk.
Shared it on Twitter and Blue Sky.
I'll probably get at least 2 extra views on that bad boy.
I'll go throw it over on Facebook too. All right. All right. Welcome to the Basic Income Show. I am your host, Scott Santons, and my co-hosts here are Josh Worth and Conrad Shaw. And for those of you who are new to the show, we talk about the recent developments in basic income news around the world. And let's get going on the latest stuff that's happened in the past 3 weeks since our last show. And the last show I just actually edited and uploaded as of yesterday. So if you didn't catch that one, go check that out. And the main topic last week was actually Pope Francis's death and how he was such a big advocate of UBI.
Oh, yeah, his life. That was a fun one. I'm gonna re-listen to that one myself.
Yeah, so I think to start off this show, let's just talk about Pope Leo for a bit. Since actually, at the time we filmed the last episode, Pope Francis had just died, and so we didn't even know, who the next pope would be and when that would happen. And it turned out to be an American for the first time ever, and he chose the name Pope Leo.
So can we have a little, before you tell us what Leo means? I don't know if you know, Josh, but I have all these. I'm like, you said it before, like it was meaningful, like he chose Leo for a very specific reason. And for me, it's like, all I can think of is Titanic, Ninja Turtles.
I think that's what he was going for. Yeah.
Is he a lion for human rights?
He's a big Leonardo DiCaprio
fan.
fan. I think that's the main reason. Yeah.
He's probably more of a Gilbert Grape fan. Honestly, that was like classic young Leo.
Were you guys watching the smoke emanate with bated breath? Because I actually tuned in for when they said the white smoke is visible. I was there and I was ready and watching, and it was exciting. I usually pay very little attention to any sort of Catholic Church activities, but this one, for some reason, it was very exciting for me. I don't know why.
And this was a big twist. I was not expecting an American. I was not following it, but I've been getting into Pope stuff a little bit recently. And watched Conclave, great movie.
I think that helped a lot.
So did I.
I think that movie really kind of like made it so we cared a little bit more. So,
and so everyone's like, "Oh my God, they did it in one day. That's unprecedented." Like we're all acting like we know how conclaves go.
Which
and then now
we saw the movie.
I want to see the two popes one, because learning more, it's like, okay, that's the first time, or that's a rare thing for one to just like not die out of the office, but to hand it off and to have a conversation. And Jonathan Pryce as Pope Francis, I really want to see that. So I've got some more Pope viewing to do.
Yeah, I wanted the new Pope just to be the guy from the movie. like, can we get that person? And just go ahead and like pick the person that they had and say,
Right.
you know what, we already did the official conclave and you saw it as a film, and so we're just going to have this actor now portray the Pope for the rest of the
Yeah, I
rest of
enjoyed
life.
the twist in Conclave. I thought that was
Mhm.
that was smart.
Right, and the writers will be his brain trust,
Mhm.
so that the same,
Right, yeah,
but like
I'd be
the
fine with that.
some of the ideas. I'm not a religious guy, and Catholicism in general has certain problems, but some of the ideas in it were really compelling to me. These ideas of uncertainty and
Mhm.
humanity. So I recommend that film to people out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good. Okay, so let's just go to the new Pope actually explaining quickly why he chose his name and what he talked about. Like, this is the very first time as Pope addressing the cardinals.
Francesco ne ha richiamato e attualizzato magistralmente i contenuti dell'esortazione apostolica Evangelii Gaudium, di cui voglio sottolineare alcune istanze fondamentali. Il ritorno al primato di Cristo nell'annuncio, la conversione missionaria di tutta la comunità cristiana, la crescita nella collegialità e nella sinodalità, l'attenzione al sensus fidei, specialmente nelle sue forme più proprie e inclusive, come la pietà popolare, la cura amorevole degli ultimi, degli scartati, e il dialogo coraggioso e fiducioso con il mondo contemporaneo nelle sue varie componenti e realtà. Proprio sentendomi chiamato a proseguire in questa scia, ho pensato di prendere il nome di Leone XIV. Diverse le ragioni, però principalmente il Papa Leone XIII affrontò la questione sociale nel contesto della prima grande rivoluzione industriale, rispondere a un'altra rivoluzione industriale e agli sviluppi dell'intelligenza artificiale che comportano nuove sfide per la difesa della dignità umana, della giustizia e del lavoro.
The previous Pope by that name, who basically oversaw the first industrial revolution.
So the recording was a bit choppy, so I lost bits of it on my end. So I missed a few words, but I got the general gist. Maybe on the edit we can drop in the.
Yeah, it'll be there in full in the edited version.
Yeah.
So basically,
so
because the guy.
He's making sort of a comparison between the Industrial Revolution and the time that we're in, just in terms of like, the same questions of human dignity and labor and all that, they are being called into question yet again. So yeah.
A lot of those terms are floating around in general, the fourth industrial revolution or the digital revolution. Clearly, people are largely in agreement that we're going through a big change in our economy and we don't know what the hell it's going to look like on the other end. And so we need to be proactive. So this is saying to you, Scott, that this is kind of an indicator that his head's in the right place to be to continue the support for UBI.
Yeah. So the previous Pope by that name was really interested in workers' rights and unions and stuff back then, and he also mentioned too about caring about the least of us, and so he's like continuing with Francis in that tradition, and at the same time also talking about AI and the impacts it's going to have on the labor force. And Pope Francis mentioned that too. So it just seems that at some point he will also endorse basic income. Who knows if it's going to be like a soon thing? I was actually kind of surprised that he just immediately started talking about AI. So maybe it will be kind of soon. But maybe,
Yeah.
he'll wait till like Easter or something, and kind of like do the same thing that the Pope did each Easter, which seemed to be mentioning the basic income then. I don't know.
Well, it makes
Do
me
you think
wonder.
the Pope? Sorry, do you think the Pope had help with from ChatGPT for that speech?
Yeah.
It's a very weird picture to see, like the Pope sitting there, like writing it up and like having a little back and forth with his chat bot about whether
Yeah.
it's phrased properly.
What's funny is like as soon as that name was announced, I actually turned to ChatGPT and asked like, why do you think that the new Pope went with Pope Leo? What do you think that potentially means? So like before there was like any journalists and stuff talking about what that meant and him talking about what that meant. ChatGPT like said what that meant. It actually seemed to be pretty accurate. Like it did mention about the previous like Pope Leo the 13th and Pope Leo the First and being like interested in workers and industrial revolution and stuff. So I don't know. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, except we're gonna see him walking down the street in a few weeks, rocking his Leo Messi jersey, and we're gonna know the real reason.
I was really excited when the Pope was that was announced too, with him being from Chicago. So my wife is from Chicago, and something I was introduced to via Chicago is something called Malort. It's a very like extremely bitter alcohol that you get that's made there in Chicago.
It's like herbal,
And
right? It's like
it's become kind of like a meme in itself. So like I was happy that day just seeing all the Malort memes about like this could be the first Pope that has tasted Malort. And I'm just picturing like Malort as the new holy water, and like all like the jokes about the Chicago's like the first like stuffed deep dish Pope, and all that stuff. I don't know. I appreciated those jokes that day.
So, but yeah, it's really, I didn't know what to expect because my whole life before Francis, I kind of saw the Catholic Church as like of a bygone era, and it was incredibly refreshing and surprising for him to come out so proactively for all these seemingly progressive things that I agreed with, and I was kind of expecting it to go back, like okay, rein that shit in, like. It makes me really curious what's going on what went on in the actual conclave, or what's going on in the church. Like, is the culture of the church at high levels really changing? Were they like, yes, more of the same, yes, or like, what were the political reasons? What were the cultural and philosophical reasons for picking this guy and so quickly? Like, was it mostly to send a message that we want someone on the inside in the U.S. Because we don't like what's going on there, or I
don't know. It did seem kind of likely that someone said at some point that there wouldn't be an American Pope until like America like went downhill and it was like on the decline, and so that seems fitting. I think it's funny that Trump immediately took credit for this, and it's like, well, if you did. Like if it was because of you, it was because that you're doing horrible things.
Wait, but why would that be an intuitive guess? Like that we wouldn't have a Pope until we were on the decline? I would have like thought the opposite without thinking too much about it.
The logic is
wasn't it? Somebody actually said that.
Yeah, the logic is that that you don't want like basically all the power resting in the U.S. Like you don't want the U.S. being like on top of the world as like the preeminent superpower, and then like also having the Pope, so like you have to like balance that out. So it makes more sense to have like the Pope in the US if the US is like no longer the global superpower that it was, and seems to be the case.
I did a tweet the other day of like what's the over under of how long it's going to be until Trump refers to Pope Leo as a nasty man. And most of the comments were like, no, nasty is the adjective for women. So it would be something like
right,
low energy Pope, or like conniving
But
Pope.
that was really funny too, how like that apparently like the new Pope hadn't tweeted anything for like 2 years until like months ago. and it was that tweet about Vance being wrong. so that was fun too, just to see like the response to like, oh, the new pope doesn't really approve of JD Vance. Not a fan.
It's funny to think of someone who's like just totally out of social media and everything, but someone is so wrong on
Right.
something that they're like, oh, I have to say something.
Yeah.
And I guess the Cardinals were like, we really like how you burned JD Vance, so
Yeah.
we're
gonna make you.
we think you got Pope stuff.
sick burn, dude.
All right, so the next thing I think would be good, it's just in response to this. This is Pete Buttigieg also talking about AI, and this framing I think is really good. And I think this is the framing that I've been pushing personally, and I think is like the winning framing. So the fact that Pete's talking about it, I think pretends that hopefully maybe this framing will pick up. So yeah, here's Pete Buttigieg talking about AI.
I think there's a way to deal in American citizens on kind of like a dividend off of the value that's being created from AI and from I don't want to take it down a whole rabbit hole, but if you imagine
UBI kind of thing,
how's that?
like a universal basic income kind of thing.
It could be. There's different ways to structure it, but I think it's giving everybody a share in the overall value that's being created by technologies, which again rest on technologies that the taxpayer paid for in the first place back in the 60s. So why shouldn't we all get a share?
Yeah, we're investing it.
Instead of it all going to this tiny handful of super, super wealthy people who are consolidating their own power, but like mega billionaires consolidating their power, right? We have to have tax policy that does that. We have to have a system that requires people who amass that kind of wealth to be sharing it with citizens. Because again, I know there's this myth. Look, I have a lot of respect for entrepreneurs who create things, and they should be hugely rewarded when they create things that are valuable. But they created those things based partly on infrastructure that all of us paid for, right? And by infrastructure, I don't just mean roads and bridges. I mean national security. I mean things like inventing the internet or mRNA vaccine technology or whatever it is. But more broadly, and this is both on the substance and the politics, I think you're naming something that's hugely important, which is the inequality in this country. It doesn't get talked about enough. It has gotten worse pretty much our entire lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, way to go, Pete.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah, he was. I'm trying to remember where he was in the debates with Andrew. I feel like generally when Andrew brought stuff up, everyone was pretty condescending about the idea of basic income. And I kind of remember Pete being like, yeah, that sounds nice and all, but, let's get real. It's good to see, like, it just reminds me of that sort of tired old, like, first they fight you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, or whatever it is, then you win. Where, like, he was already, I think Pete was ahead of the direct, like, I don't know, he was more open to it than the others. But this is a good framing for a lot of people, and for people who kind of think in more of a wonky way like Pete. But it's also a good framing for people who think in terms of just both moral fairness, but like sustainability and viability, like a real answer to where is his money coming from and why does that make sense and why is that just? It's like, yeah, we all own everything. And he brings up the infrastructure idea of like all the parts of the infrastructure that I would say don't just in part, make all these advances and innovations and businesses possible. It's like in majority part. And he brought up, a few like roads and military but there, I kind of think it would be interesting to like tease out a few more of the things people don't often think about as the infrastructure we all lean on. Like the internet obviously was funded, the research was funded by all of us. That makes a lot of this possible. But like laws themselves, private property, like as an idea, like is it exists because we've created it. We've developed a national identity. We've developed language. All of these things, like when you really dig deep enough and be like, oh yeah, if I just was born in the jungle, not around people or civilization, I'd be a trillion miles away, like progress wise from anything we're talking about. So it's sort of it disabuses this idea of like just independently doing something yourself. So yeah, what Josh and Scott, what do you think? Like, what are some other things that are infrastructure that we owe to that people don't usually think of?
Well, the
Yeah,
way that
I mean, sorry,
Go ahead,
I
Josh.
picture just like the human infrastructure, like that there are people around us everywhere that are sort of together. We are kind of working to, we're serving each other, and we're all like kind of part of a larger collective. So that's how I see things. Like as far as like specifics, like that, like specifically like public things that are taken for granted. Yeah, I mean everything. Like there's pretty much all of the taxes we pay, you would think should go towards some sort of collective lifting of all of us. But yeah,
Like there is nothing that is naturally occurring almost at all in our
right.
society. Like it's all
Mhm.
manufactured, and we owe the possibility of doing anything to all of that building that we've done as a human species.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's an essay that I really like by Gar Alperovitz, a technological inheritance argument for basic income. I'm sure we talked about it before, but just for people who aren't familiar with it, it's looking back and saying, all right, we're all building on the shoulders of the previous generations. Everything that we're accomplishing now is only possible because of the generation before us, and the generation before that, generation before that. So, it was mentioned there by Pete that, public funding went into this stuff. And that's true. A lot of public funding did go into all of these things, um, but also the knowledge of those people that are now dead. Like Josh mentioned, like we're all interdependent, and that is a generational thing. So, it does not make sense for, let's say, one person who is the majority shareholder of one company that uses 300 years worth of generations development of technology to create this imagine a robot or machine that can do everything and do every job, and that one company becomes like this mega trillion company and takes over everything, and this one person is a mega trillionaire, and everyone else loses out, and does that make sense that we're disinherited from all of this stuff, and there's one
Yeah.
person inherits the generations of technology and knowledge? Like,
And that's, I mean, I think the 300-year time frame is like an easier one to point to. Is like that's how long it took to like for our country to develop into what it is. But
yeah,
I personally like I don't think it lands as well. But I go back to 10,000 years or however long since like language and just general society whatsoever. All of this stuff has been painstakingly developed and over many agriculture. Like you can't start a business if you don't have easy access to food. Otherwise, you're just going to be a hunter gatherer or a farmer. You can't be a startup company entrepreneur until we're like 200 years beyond the Industrial Revolution, right? Like
yeah.
all of that has to happen, and we all like all of our ancestors invested in that, and none of us can take credit for it. So it's all an inheritance, like 99%.
But besides like just the fact that it's kind of like a good framing for that argument, that like it's a good way, it's very illustrative of how we kind of are all, we've all contributed to this sort of wealth generating mechanism that's in the form of AI, right? Like besides that, like are you seeing like that there's some that a dividend needs to actually be tied to the value created by AI in some way? Like it does that argument sort of say, well, people that are actually making money from AI need to be contributing more in some way? Or is it just more of like a framing question in your head, Scott?
I don't know. I think it's both of those things, and I would like people to, like, let's say, get their foot in the door as one of them, and then start thinking about the other one. Maybe like in regards to like the bigger picture, I think is people looking at this and going, "Oh well, any kind of basic income is deserved and should be considered compensation for AI, and our training of it and our investing in it and everything." And that's that's great. But then also there is that limiting factor of people thinking, okay, well, that means, it should only be like a robot tax, um, and then like, the amount needs to be small because let's say AI as a sector is only worth, 10 billion or something. And then they calculate out that, oh, well, on average, each person should be only getting $100 a month right now or whatever. And so still with that, I'm like, okay, well, if that's how you feel, then okay, like start with that. And then hopefully people start widening their thinking and going, like, even thinking more like Conrad of like, well, what about land? What about the fact that there used to all be, this Thomas Paine's argument that we are all common owners of the land and we were disinherited by it by those who decided to create private property and lock all of us out of it via laws. And we would have, now we're worse off because we don't have access to the land. So like hopefully if you can get your foot in the door with some kind of small UBI based on some small argument, based on some specific funding mechanism, then maybe that can grow.
There's the part that, there's maybe a counter argument to that idea is that like right now we've kind of all got access to, we all have the ability at this point to exploit AI. It's fairly open source. There's nobody's really gatekeeping it at this point. I mean, a little bit here and there, but like for the most part, it is kind of a free for all right now. Like the people making money, nobody's quite sure even how to make money off of it because it's so like widespread and so openly available. And I'm sure, eventually like it'll go the way of the internet, which was also free to everybody. And it, like at some point, the wealth generated by the tools will eventually coagulate in the hands of smaller and smaller groups of people. But like right now, I don't see a lot of people getting super rich off of AI by exploiting it, except for like maybe you could say OpenAI or like Facebook a little bit, but I don't know. They're also spending a ton of money on it.
There's also the harms to consider too. And so you can say that there's no one getting rich off yet, although there's definitely people, already
right.
getting lots of money off of this and, they're starting up their own businesses or whatever. But also there's definitely people who have been negatively impacted by this. Like there's artists who are no longer able to find clients for their work because their clients just use an image generator, and like those issues are already with us. So I think there's the same kind of like, there's something there as far as like, should you get basic income because you get a share? And I agree that's true. And that's like what Pete's saying. But also there's something there as far as like, if you are being harmed, then there needs to be compensation for that harm. And those harms are already here. So that should be considered too.
I think I still find, I mean, I'm grateful for the effect that the AI reality is having on like the ability to make this argument. But to me, thinking more holistically, AI is just a much like more present and severe version of like resource scarcity versus resource abundance, and this argument that we all deserve some, we all owe some based on interconnectivity. Like it's just making it happen so much faster. It's harder to ignore. But when like what it really implies to me, the whole dividend framing is the best framing in general. Just because it implies a mental shift, that really says we are all interconnected. This is a bit, the society thing is like a team effort, and as much individuality as you want to express in your life, complete rugged individualism is a delusion. We are all sort of building this thing together, and the mental shift that needs to happen on a personal level is like breaking out of this. These are the makers and the takers. These are the people contributing and leeching. Is that no, every single one of us, whoever you are part of this. You do matter. As much as the world makes us not feel like we matter, we all matter, and we all deserve enough power and access to make the best of our opportunities, and we all owe based on what we benefit from our mutual inheritance, from our teamwork. And that shift is something that, yes, I spent plenty of time trying to like intellectually argue that and try to get people to make that shift so that we can do the change. And that's just such a big mindset change to get done on scale in a noisy environment that I that's why I've turned my hope towards like create the reality so that people can learn the mindset shift. Like the people on Commingle, the people getting basic income, the people in our Bootstraps pilot, the people who've been like living through these sorts of experiments. You, Scott, with your basic income, basically when you experience a different way of being, then it becomes intuitive rather than trying to envision something and then make it real. You just sort of begin to understand the thing you're already experiencing, and it can spread that way.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
hate to see though that like this argument kind of turns into some like penalty against those who are trying to exploit AI at this point, like using it to reduce labor, for instance. Like if you've replaced your workforce with robots, do you suddenly have to now like pay a tax that's now going towards a dividend, right? Like to single out the people that are basically just doing what needs to be done, like in a way, like just kind of following the path of innovation and development would then like be stifled by the fact that they are being singled out as people that need to pay more towards the dividend, right? Like I think that keeping the idea as a like collective dividend makes sense.
Right. Keeping it in terms of like, this is what you owe based on an obligation to your fellow man, not this is a punishment. Anytime it goes into the realm of like, this is a penalty, I think it's a very unhealthy way to be building policy and worldview.
Yeah, I mean, I have mixed feelings with like the idea of a robot tax, and I know some people really love the idea of a robot tax, but you know, like what Josh is saying, you know, there's an impact where, let's say you're running a car manufacturing company, and you've got 500 workers, and there's a new robot that's possible, and so you invest in those robots, and now you don't need 500 people anymore. You can lower it to 400 or something. And so robot taxers will say, well, okay, that robot, let's say one robot is equivalent to 10 people. It's calculated out. And then so now they're no longer paying those wages. And then so let's somehow like tax that robot in a way that kind of approximates what that worker would pay in payroll taxes, in income taxes, and these things. And that gets really complicated. Like it's doable, and you can kind of think about that, but also that disincentivizes automation a little bit. So maybe there wouldn't be as much automation as what could be. And then from my perspective, I mean, I don't want, if a job can be automated, I think great. I just want to make sure that the people aren't somehow hurt by the loss of income from that. I want them to be like more able to do stuff, not like
I would reframe it. It's like, instead of a penalty like that's tied to having a robot or replacing a job, it should be more like a windfall tax. It's like you as a company or a person are like benefiting disproportionately with this windfall income because you're disproportionately using like our technological inheritance. So like if you win the lottery, you pay taxes on your lottery stuff, right? It's like you are reaping extra outsized benefits because of our social inheritance. Whereas if you're driving a garbage truck as an employee, you are not collecting on your social inheritance. So that tax on that is a way to make sure everyone's is collecting on that technological
like if your
inheritance.
corporate tax is going towards a UBI, and everybody's corporate tax is going towards a UBI, an increase in profits that you see from laying off a bunch of workers and replacing them with a robot should then be reflected in that amount that you're being taxed on. And so it's kind of like coming out in the wash in a way, right? So.
And I see, like, if we frame everything around how much do we have in resources and how much do we want to make sure everyone has, rather than like these are all compensations for ills rather than these are proactive. Like what I'm saying, that's not what they should be. What they should be is like, this is a proactive pre-distribution of enough resources to everyone based on the fact that we are a resource abundant society. Like, it doesn't have to be about penalizing someone. It has to be about just making sure everyone has enough resources, and where do we take those resources from? Well, where they exist. Like, all of that technological resource is being held by a very few people, but it actually belongs to everybody.
Yeah, there's another part to this too that leads into the next thing I want to talk about. And so with Pete and with like the AI dividend stuff, it's like, okay, so we should receive a UBI because of AI, because we deserve it, and because of all the investments and what we put into it. And then also, I mentioned that there's these harms that are being caused, and so we want to alleviate and compensate for those harms caused by technology. And there's another part of it, which is this next thing, which is about like how much better things could be. If we actually provided UBI to everyone as this kind of dividend, then people would be more free to do all kinds of stuff that they feel valuable. And we'd all be happier with people doing stuff that they enjoy and love. And so this actually took off on Blue Sky recently. And I think really provides a good example of this. So let's see. Here's this post that went viral on Blue Sky. So this is from doordie.bsk.social. Okay, but for real, if you want to make a really good indie or AA games, the number one way is be financially comfortable via other means. Blueprints guy owned a popular website generating income. Toby Fox was a successful musician. Frankly, if you had a UBI, you'd get so many good games. And so this is in response actually to a new game release called Claire Obscure Expedition 33. And it just kind of came out of nowhere to be like a massive hit, potential like game of the year kind of game. And like it in itself is it's a good example of like what basic income could do. So like here's a little bit of the story of this game to give you an idea of what I mean here. So here's the title. This is a BBC article, Claire Obscure, How Passion Project Became 2025's Most Talked About Game. So this game was born out of the pandemic. The lead creator of it was working at Ubisoft at the time. It's funny, like on a side note, Ubisoft is something that I see a lot of because UBI, a lot of people will just refer to Ubisoft as Ubi and just UBI. So I'm always reading posts about
It's popping up
Ubisoft
in your
stuff.
feed all the time.
You're
Yeah.
you're just like professionally trained to skip past Ubisoft in your Google alerts every morning or whatever.
Yeah, so it's funny to me. Like usually there's those things don't really intersect, but this one, like
Here
this
they
was a
are,
true
yeah.
intersection of like Ubisoft and UBI. And so so the lead creator was just like bored as their job at Ubisoft at this AAA game studio, cranking out kind of like factory games that he wasn't really passionate about. And he really loved Final Fantasy games. And so he wanted to do like his own. And so, you're in the middle of a pandemic and he's like bored and he has like a little bit more means to be able to do this. So he starts like reaching out to people, and these other people also at the time, like they're bored during like the height of the pandemic. And they've also got a little bit more resources to time and resources, thanks to, the stimulus that was done during that time and like the lockdowns and stuff. So he put together this crew of around 30 people that was like the core group, and spent the next 5 years building this game. So this game just came out, and people are just loving it. And so part of this discussion right now, because of this, is wouldn't be amazing if like more of us could do this? How is it?
Yeah.
He was able to do this thanks to his like own like kind of passive income and stuff, and was able to do this.
Yeah, and in what realms? Like this is games. It's a very big industry, very big creative outlet these days, growing and growing. It's same in film. It's same in music. It's same in literature. It's same in journalism. It's same in tech and innovation. It's same in mathematics. Like, I think as a species, I know that sometimes you're impassioned and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you want to get by. Sometimes you want in self-care. Sometimes you're driven and impassioned and you have a big idea. I feel like in general, if people who are impassioned are allowed to pursue that passion, we become a much more successful and an impressive like species. Like what we should lean into when people have passion, and the idea of a passion project like that. Most people don't ever get to pursue passion projects, beyond like having kids. Like that's the fallback. Like,
Yeah,
that's my passion project.
I would say maybe now. I would say like we only see the passion projects. The successful ones are the ones that have sort of had a little backing to them, where there was some freedom to, spend extra time on it. But I think I there was something in that article that said that this was like an unusual approach to game development, which I think it's probably a little bit unusual, but I think the general pattern of just kind of like wanting to work on something, reaching out to see who else wants to help, if there's anybody else that's got some time to spend on it. Like, I don't think that's that strange. I think many creative projects work that way.
Yeah, you just have to be able to do that. Like, you can't just want to do that. You've got to have the
Right.
resources.
But I'm saying
to do
it's
that.
happening anyway. Like, people are doing
Yeah,
that already.
and so and like the people sharing those stories too were people that had happened to as well.
Yeah.
Like, we know it happens to a degree, but we know that with UBI, more people would be able to
go
do that.
crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
Like the potential for innovation is amazing.
Financial security and risk tolerance is what turns a hobby into a passion. Like, if you can't put the time
Right.
into it that your passion demands, then it's not really a passion project. It could be a passion project, but it's a hobby. And I remember like doing indie films and things, and trying to ask my buddies and plays, and trying to ask my buddies from acting and whatever to come do it with me. You can't pay anybody anything. Everyone's volunteering. And so anytime you try to set up the film shoot or whatever, like 3 of the 8 people you were going to do it with are like, I just got a gig, I got to go take it. And it's like, I got to pay rent, or it's New York City. And like, if I think a lot about if I had graduated acting school with a UBI, just like me and my 3 buddies from class would have got, our UBI would have paid for our apartment, and we would have just made little films and plays and just like full-time explored the passion to see like, is this going to be our thing? Is this going to be our life? And instead, you do it as a hobby for 10 hours a week on the side, while you just kind of, your actual passion gets drained into your day job.
But yeah, like the capabilities that are opening up with AI tools are now like kind of really reinforcing that like you could you could probably come up with a decent film right now, just using AI tools. Like, the amount of money that it would take to create like a very valuable work of art would be, thousands of times less than it would have been 10 years ago. Like, you're not having to pay effects houses. You're not having to pay for, massive production companies. Like, so like, the barrier to entry is low, but it's still, you still got to eat, right? You still got to, and also you got to wonder what's happening with people in those effects houses, right? Like, they are now like wondering where their next check's going to come from.
Yeah, I wanted to read some more of these comments about this, and this is people feeding off of it and sharing their own. And it's just again, it just had so many people talking about basic income because of this and relating it to games and art and stuff. So here's a couple other things. So the top said, here to say that we couldn't exist without arts funding. Not only would 1000X Resist not exist without arts funding, we as artists who practice for years trying to understand ourselves and our mediums don't exist without arts funding. Fund the arts, all of them, including games. So that's the creator of another game called 1000X Resist. And another one, Viv is 100% correct here. Your options are always one of three. Do not make an indie game. Get funding, usually by making something that fits a very narrow and useless definition of safe, and subsequently losing agency over your production reality. And three, have another income or means.
Yeah, this is why Bootstraps we're going on 9 years, is because we wanted to make it what it is, and it took a very long time to get a lot of risk that we personally unwisely took on to get it to where it is without like compromising it.
Yeah, you're definitely living, the experience of an independent film project.
So it does happen, but it's like unwise, and it makes sense that people don't usually do it.
Yeah.
Speaking of those 9 years, I just want to, like, there's my partner Dea, the director of Bootstraps. She loves to make a point that of all the resources that we talk about, the most precious and the most fundamental resource to the human experience is time. And that's what financial security buys, is time and bandwidth. And that's what passions and arts and things require, is your time and attention.
Yeah. I mean, like, basically every single time you're, let's say an artist is looking for, $50,000 grant or something to work on stuff, it's like, you're not really paying for the work. What you're doing is saying, here's money so that you can live and pay your rent and pay your bills and be able to even do some fun stuff and stuff too. But now you don't have to do, this job that takes up your time. So yeah, you have that time, and that time you can fill with whatever it is that you most want to do. So yeah, it's that's what it all is. It all comes down to time and the freedom to fill it the way that you want to. And right now we're all being, for the most part, unless you're born into wealth and already have some kind of passive income or something, then you don't have that freedom to own your own time. Someone else owns it, and you have to do what they're paying you to do, because they're controlling the resources. They own the property, they own the land, they own the wealth. So I hope people start to even see more of this as like as a freedom thing to do great things, instead of being limited by where they are now. There's a couple other responses too that I liked. There's a AA game I love to make with friends, but I don't want to make it badly enough to start a company and risk my family's financial security to do it.
Yeah. What's AA stand for?
And it's just a step down from AAA game is like, you're spending $200 million on a video game. Yeah. And, a studio full of hundreds and hundreds of people or whatever. Like, those are your major game studios are making AAA games. And then your independent stuff is like AA. So the one, having 2 kids and a mortgage is a big reason why I've stuck around in AAA so long. But I would love to just be able to create things without stressing about how I'm going to turn that into a viable income.
It's funny, the AAA rating, it kind of reminds me of the banking world and all of that too, where it's like AAA is the biggest, top, best, or whatever, but everyone's so dissatisfied with it. Like all the big budget movies and things too, where it's like, I'm not creatively fulfilled. I know I could do much better stuff. It's like the highest esteem, like outwardly, but it's like the most unfulfilling and uninteresting work to all the people doing it, and probably largely to a lot of the audience as well. It's like the safe stuff that isn't actually that inspiring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's something that they're kind of touching on here too, is just like the effort it takes to monetize whatever passion project you're working on. Like if they're really interested in just working on a little game or making some game tools, like you still gotta figure out how to monetize that, and that is
Yeah.
then like basically a different job.
Right.
That's now like figuring out how to make a business out of it, which
Yeah.
I run into that all the time. Like I run a design business, and like the running the business part of it is a job that takes away from the designing business. So it's and everybody deals with that, but it's
Right.
a UBI would sort of take the burden off of that effort quite a bit.
I think also what I was saying before about AAA and AA made me think of why sequels always are worse. Is like you take a AA movie that or B movie or something, but that became a cult classic because it just had that spark of like no one's ever done anything quite like this. It's these new ideas. Like sure, we have to forgive us a couple of silly things, but like we grew up with this and then they're like, let's remake it with a bunch of Abercrombie models and a $200 million budget. And you just kind of sit there watching the great CGI explosions. And you're like, no, I Total Recall was way better when it was like the shitty claymation head exploding and all that stuff. It's like, like, why would you redo that with a big budget? It just kind of kills it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. It's about decisions about out of safety and odds for profit, and yeah, you just all okay. Existing IP is safer because it has its own audience, so we got to do existing IP. It's just so much riskier to do something brand new and original, and it can be inspired by stuff. Claire Obscure seems to be like that kind of thing where it's a totally original story, but it's based on inspired by some things, but like it's original IP, and that's great to see. And I'm sure there's going to be some sequel to it too now because it was big enough and popular, and it will have something, you know. If it's based or inspired by Final Fantasy has all kinds of sequels that have been great games. So
Right.
maybe Claire Obscure could be the next thing like that. But yeah, it's just great to see something original really land because we're in this time where it's just these studios and the big money is just making the safest bets that it can.
Well, I think it's interesting to think of these big studios and industries as like macrocosms of like regular human beings. If there's this scarcity thing where we need survival, we need profit, whatever, then all of a sudden the creativity goes way down. The thing eventually eats itself. Like I remember the time when like Netflix was throwing bajillions of dollars at everything, throwing shit against the wall, being big and creative, and now they've retreated into safety and less interesting stuff. And like businesses and industries in general, because they're tied to the need for profit, lose their soul, obviously. And then when someone comes in with like a shitload of extra money doing it like a passion project, like Apple comes in and TV's not really their thing, and they start cranking out these amazing shows because they're just throwing a lot of money at creatives with wonky ideas, and all of a sudden everyone's inspired. And then eventually it'll become their thing, and they'll be like, well, we have to keep making more and more profit, and then they'll start to suck,
Yeah, it's always the people that are not following the current order of directions or something that create the next thing that becomes a new order of direction. So like with Claire Obscure, apparently, at the time back in 2020, the studios were saying, look, no one's interested in kind of turn-based RPG kind of combat stuff, like traditional RPG stuff, and we're not going to fund any of that stuff. So independently, Claire Obscure was able to do its thing, and now it's huge and potentially game of the year. And suddenly, I'm sure these other studios are looking at this going, oh, this is what people want. So they're the ones saying what people didn't want, and someone else does what they're not supposed to do. And that is what becomes a new, like, normal or standard or whatever.
Yeah. And that's kind of always that's how filmmaking is a lot. And it's a lot of art works that way. Like it's, but I don't really see like UBI changing that dynamic too much, except for the fact that it's now like, the sort of the petri dish, the larger culture is now like able to produce more stuff that is like more. I mean, it's called a culture. Like it's actually you're seeing like smaller and smaller parts of the culture being able to contribute, right? As opposed to like having well-funded groups.
Right.
Like it takes money more out of the equation.
Yeah, and it's not only about like say how $1,000 per month would enable you to afford to do this, but it's the prevention of downside risk, saying, I don't want this to fail, and then my family has to move out of our house, and potentially go on the street or whatever. There's that omnipresent fear, and that was one of the people in the comments that they even said that they said. The only thing they're only sticking with AAA studios right now instead of doing their own thing because they're afraid of the financial insecurity stuff. So it's not only it's the other side of it where if people are less afraid of doing these things, that's why entrepreneurship is boosted so much in basic income pilots. It's not just like that $1,000 per month can enable you to afford to start a business. It's that you're no longer afraid to start a business of what happens if it fails.
Right.
And it's funny, like it's where capitalistic innovating and incentivizing effects at maybe at some scale, or I'm forming this idea, but like at some point it clearly becomes a strangling effect on innovation and excellence and brilliance, and creativity. I want to talk about Justin Goldberg's comment in the chat because I'm confused by it. Seems like he's a Bitcoin fan. But he recently said, so you're admitting that UBI requires absolute Orwellian surveillance to be able to run the business side of things for you. I just don't know what that means. I can't connect those thoughts. But
we will accept further elaboration if you want to, Justin.
But the Orwellian surveillance is the exact opposite. It's about not surveilling. It's about not controlling a population. It's about giving people a freedom. And it's trickier on the business side. Like if we're comparing people and businesses, to understand like what it looks like to give businesses like less of that scarcity. But I don't know how you leap to Orwellian surveillance as like what that implies.
Yeah, I don't know if he's responding to Josh, and Josh talking about how like having AI tools are like makes someone more capable, more able to be more productive and do more stuff. And maybe if you're anti AI or something, and you're saying that like the use of those tools is actually feeding into this like information gathering, information eating like apparatus, maybe that's what he's referring to. I don't know, but I don't like using Orwellian at all when it comes to UBI, except to say the opposite. Is in you do have more power to say no, and you have more freedom to say yes. And the Orwellian situation is what we're in right now. Like it's right now that's Orwellian.
I often, when I'm talking to like more conservatives, like there's like parts of UBI to me that become that lessen the need for regulation on businesses as well. Like I share frustrations with like how hard it is to fire someone from a company, right? Because in this society, if you fire someone, then they're out on their ass and they have no food and their kids starve and they don't have health care. And so now it's incumbent upon businesses to be that last line of defense for their employees, which is not what businesses are supposed to be, like in a capitalistic and in the legal system we have. Like their number one job is profits, and they need like regulations need to be in place societally to make sure people are safe. But punting that responsibility for the safety of people onto the businesses has all these like perverse outcomes where it's like now you can't fire people, and now you're paying 5 people to be around while one person does their job. And it's like I would love to have like a more like you have a contract with your employer. It's at will. Like they keep you around as long as they want you, and they're not required to make sure you're safe for the rest of your life, and pensions and things. I feel like that kind of stuff, like basic safety and longevity, should be something that is taken on societally, so businesses can be free and more flexible, and the regulations on businesses can, you still want to prevent abuse and stuff, but you don't want to make them responsible for every facet of a person's life. They're just a business. Like, that's a government's job.
Yeah. Imagine how many people are working in an office or some job of any kind, surrounded by people and they're making the lives of their coworkers like miserable, or at least worse, because they don't want to be there, but then like the employer feels that they don't want to fire them or can't fire them. Like, what if they're an employer and like if an employee has cancer or something, and that firing them could be their death sentence because they lose their health care. So maybe you're keeping them on just for that reason. And it's like, well, I mean, we should
That's
have
dystopian.
universal health care so that never happens.
Right.
Like, no one should be in a situation where they're keeping a job that they hate, or they're keeping a worker that they think is terrible at their job or something, or making the lives of their other coworkers miserable. Like, none of that makes sense. Like, we should make sure that everyone has health care and survival income so that that situation doesn't happen.
That's the other thing too, is like you brought up something with they don't want to be there. I was endlessly frustrated with like all these managers, they go through these stacks of hundreds of applications and they hire all these doofuses who don't actually want to be there. And why is it so hard for me to get a job? And, like bitter stuff coming out of college. And I think fairly often about like, what if people were actually doing the things they wanted to do rather than the things to be safe? Like, if I'm getting out of college as an engineer, is the competition pool cut in half because all the people who didn't actually want that job, myself included, it turned out, in the end, like weren't like doing it because like, well, this is a way to get a pension at this company or something, like, like that's it.
Yeah, the incentives are all over the place, so you never quite know like why people are doing what they're doing or why they're working at a job. Like you often wonder, like, why are you here? Like, you appear to hate this job that you're doing, and like I'm talking to you on the phone, and you're supposed to be like providing me customer service, and
right.
Like, this actually happened where like a customer service person was like complaining about their life to me. Like, I was like, I'm supposed to be complaining to you. Like, I'm telling you what a horrible company you're working for, and you're like just agreeing with it.
I don't want to be here. One of my favorite observations from the German group, I think we may have talked about this before, but I just love how they hired on like an unconditional employee. Unconditional is in like the employee got the income regardless of whatever work that they did, or if they showed up for work or anything like that. Like, they were really like leaning into unconditional basic income, and they were saying like, let's just see what happens if someone actually, is really choosing to be at work, like because they want to and they're wanting to do the work. And Michael Bohmeyer, the head of Line Green come and like got into an argument with this employee, and they were just disagreeing on something, and the employee was like, Matt, I'm not going to show up to work tomorrow, and it was like, and Michael was kind of like hurt by that, and was worried that she wasn't going to show up to work, and then she did show up to work, the next day, and Michael was so surprised that like his reaction to that was like, it makes me feel so good that you like you were voluntarily here. You're choosing to be here to do this work, even though, like we may have our disagreements or whatever, but like suddenly he as an employer felt like the benefit of the voluntary side. So like, we're always talking about how great it would be to voluntarily choose to work for someone, but we like hardly ever think about what that would feel like for the boss to be surrounded by people who were choosing to be there. And so just imagine how much better that work environment is for everybody, since everyone is choosing to be there, including even the employer themselves going like, I love that all my workers are here because they want to be here.
Instead of all these top down, like, we're a family, and like all this corporate language and all this stuff where it's like coping mechanisms or masks for us all to ignore the like dystopian realities, or like how, progressives and lefties like double down so hard on like, like this again punitive mentality of like these companies have to be shamed and punished for doing the things that actually they have to do, or they'll go out of business in the competitive landscape, right? It's like a cognitive dissonance of the reality of the situation, where if everyone can be there voluntarily, then it can develop as like a real family. Like these are people who are choosing to do this work with each other because
Yeah.
they care about the work, they like the people they're around, they don't absolutely fucking need it. So all of a sudden, there's like a health to the ecosystem, like a mental health to the ecosystem, and it's founded on something other than desperation.
I
Yeah,
do
like-
like this idea of like companies just like paying, you just pay salary. You just like you can imagine like a science fiction world where it's like a company is really just a place that issues paychecks to a certain number of people, right? Like, and you hope that those people come in and help you make money to pay them, right? Like, that's a weird idea.
Yeah, you're hoping that
Right.
everyone's involved in somehow. You know, I guess it kind of
Yeah.
is connected again last week when we were talking about Mike Rowe and like the ownership kind of
Mhm.
mentality of what if every worker was an owner, like a co-owner.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's the same kind of thing where if you want to be there, then it's going to be a different environment.
It is really fun to be starting a company with Josh because he has these kooky ideas where he's like, what if we just randomly paid a bunch of people and like wondered if they would show up and work for us?
mean,
Like, how are they? Let's try it out. It's like,
That's kind of like it like the whole concept of UBI kind of invites all those ideas. You're like, why
Yeah.
are we thinking about, like, we're really stuck in capitalistic ways of thinking about competition and stuff. So
Yeah.
like, yeah.
to me, I mean, one of the things that has stuck for me is like an interesting idea to pursue. Like we have to start writing out the bylaws and things for Commingle, of like how we're gonna do the money flow, compensation. We want it to be super transparent and above board and everything. So one of the ideas that like came that Josh brought up just like in a moment where I'm like, actually, that's really interesting, is everyone gets the same hourly wage, and it's like, especially if it's an at-will company, like, and you are a human being and a human hour is worth this. We can keep you for as many hours as you want to give if we need you, and we don't have to if we don't need you, and whatever, vice versa. You can come if you want, and then try to keep it like a low staff for our company, but also make it competitive and have from the top to the bottom, everyone gets the same hourly salary.
Yeah, it kind of did spring out of like, if you think about like you've got a company that can now like make so much money, like, or just imagine you've got a company that can make so much money doing something with very little overhead or paying very few people. Like, you now have enough money to just hire people to do nothing, right? Like, you now could be this just benevolent corporation that just pays salaries for, and people do whatever the heck they want, right? Like
Yeah.
I mean, I think about, like, I live in like a building where there's like people that like park your cars and stuff, like, and like I always just like park my own car, but there's like a doorman there to hold your door. Like, they are clearly doing very little. Like, there's like 3 people at the door when there could be like 1 person at a security desk, and it's kind of there. Like, I don't know why it's there. Like, it's there is like some holdover from like past days of like needing your servants around and stuff. But
Yeah.
so I was like, I would happily just let those people go do something else. Like, I don't care. You could keep charging me like the same dumb amount for like HOA dues. Just go let them do something else. Like, there's something
Right.
to like, a salary doesn't have to, it's just decoupling salary from work, decoupling livelihood from work, like, then opens up like a lot of different possibilities.
I love that idea as like sort of a Star Trek future sort of premise, where a human hour is worth the same thing. If you're the janitor or the CEO or whatever, if you're giving us an hour of your life, this is what you're worth. And it like really implies this abundance, which really implies, like, for our case, like if we're sort of jury rigging this into a present day company, we have to find ways to divorce Commingle's business from profit motive and like limit it to public benefit motive, like, and also be really efficient so that we can do this, right? But in some Star Trek future where it's like, if you're gonna give of your time to someone else, then you get the same thing everyone else gets. And that is on top of like already having enough power and access to do what you want.
Yeah, that gets into like a lot of the like time banking ideas. That there was a good Freakonomics episode with Andrew Yang on it where he's talking about time banking and like, let's try this out. And that got me thinking a lot. Like there's and then I started figuring like, can you come up with like some standard price tag for a human hour, right? Like, could you say not a minimum wage, but like if you divide up the cost it takes to live your entire life and then divide that by the number of hours you'll probably live, like you get a price. Like, can you say that that is the amount it costs to live that 1 hour, right? Like I think you kind of could, and I did start working on it, and like there's it does like then open up like a lot of other possibilities for how you can structure payments to people.
I don't know. Instead of thinking of like per hour, it makes me think again of like going back to the dividend kind of scenario and stockholders and seeing ourselves as stockholders. So imagine again like kind of the Star Trek scenario where there is 100% capacity. Like whatever that 100% capacity is of utilization of resources and technology and materials, people, knowledge, everything. And each person, let's say there's 300 million people or whatever, then each one of those has 1/300 millionth of like that total capacity. So you can imagine it as being like a share. And so whatever that total capacity is, you as a human being have your share of that total capacity, and you can do with that whatever you want. And then it also like helps look at it from an abundance perspective of, we're all better off if we increase capacity. So like we can increase capacity by, working harder, working smarter, coming up with better technology, figuring out ways of using resources so that we do more with less. Like all of that opens up from we all get a share of total capacity.
Right.
And I don't know,
Yeah.
it kind of makes me like, I kind of wonder if that's how like Star Trek works,
Well,
like under the hood.
Right. They
So
didn't
that's-
actually expand on this very well.
That's sort of
Yeah.
like, to me, that's the societal UBI level. Whereas if you're a company within that paradigm, then you're which we aren't. You're like the hourly thing is like a way to break up like extra on top of stuff where everyone also gets the dividend. But it becomes this way to like acknowledge that your time is this scarce resource that you could put towards whatever the fuck you wanted to.
Yeah,
so
it's
you're-
kind of saying the same as what Scott was expanding on, but it's more like time is the capital that's there. It's not the potential for value creation or other monetary creation, right? Like it has to stop at the fact that you're gonna die, right? Like
Right.
the limitation is only your
Right.
mortality, right?
But and then like in this, I mean, it's a very simplistic idea for one aspect of a Star Trek economy, but then you also want like someone who wants to lead a giant organization and invent a new, like you want ways to access large amounts of capital beyond like survival and hourly,
Yeah.
like whatever. But it's just an intriguing idea. Like I started off on this track to be like, to let everyone know what it's like working with Josh, where he every now and he hits me with a thing. It's like, what if we just kind of did it like this? And sometimes I have a meltdown because it's like upending the entire design of Commingle that I
Right.
feel very strongly about.
Right. No, we have to start
Sometimes
over. Yeah.
He's like, what if we
Right.
actually didn't do this but did that? I'm like, oh my god, I've spent $10,000 on this spreadsheet, or hours on this spreadsheet.
Sorry.
But it's a good thought experiment always.
All right, so to go to the next thing from this, this connects well again, I think. So here we are, we're talking about, just like all the things that you would choose to do and be better able to do if you had a basic income that is, on the one hand, enabling you with the resources to do more stuff that you want to do, but also freeing up your time to do those things. And so that brings me to the idea of a baby bonus and the Trump administration wanting to incentivize more children. So here's just a little clip about this to just make sure everyone knows, in case you missed it, that this is what they are talking about as a way of, incentivizing more kids. Like, I wonder what you possibly do that maybe would enable parents to have more kids.
And the New York Times reports the Trump administration is considering proposals to encourage more American women to get married and have babies. The incentives would potentially include giving $5,000 in cash to American mothers after delivery and funding programs to educate women on their menstrual cycles. The administration officials,
because that's the problem,
pro-natalist on several occasions.
I want more babies in the United States of America. And I want beautiful young men and women who are eager to welcome them into the world and eager to raise them.
The birth rate is low in almost every country. And it's something, unless that changes, civilization will disappear. America had the lowest birth rate, I believe, ever. That was last year.
I'll be known as the fertilization president, and that's okay. That's not bad.
And New York Times reporter Caroline Kitchener joins me now to talk more about this. Caroline, thanks for coming on. I know you did a deep dive on this topic. So what else can you tell us about these potential incentives and the overall goal here?
Well, we don't know what the Trump administration is going to do yet, but I had started hearing from sources that they were taking these meetings and they were having these conversations, and they were saying to advocates who care very deeply about the declining birth rate, here, come to us, bring us your proposals. And so that's what they did. And they've really been hearing them out.
Bring us your ideas.
So I think it's anybody's guess
whatever you can
what
think
they're
of.
going to do. But I think it's fair to expect them to do something.
As we're talking about this, the national birth rate has declined since 2007. Last year, the CDC reported birth rates are at a historic low. So why are Americans having fewer children, and why is that so significant?
I think there are a lot of reasons for it, and different parts of this movement highlight different reasons in line with their goals. So from social conservatives, from Christian conservatives, you'll hear talk about, the crisis of the traditional family and how media and politics is giving women kind of a different idea of what they should value, that they should value work over family. You hear them talk a lot about how people are having babies later, getting married later, or not getting married at all. And that's a really big concern for a lot of people that are very close to President Trump and this administration.
You say the desire to increase funds to help mothers and babies could collide with other administration priorities. What do you mean by that?
Well, we've seen big cuts in a lot of these agencies that are very relevant to some of these goals. For example, in the Department of Health and Human Services, we saw massive cuts to the Division of Reproductive Health. Now, that's something that's the IVF division was within that part of the department. And yet you've heard Donald Trump say, I am the fertilization president, I am the father of IVF, and making really big promises in that area. But yet you see these cuts. So I think, we have to see how, these priorities align with DOGE and potential cuts that we have seen and that we could see going forward.
All right. New York Times reporter Caroline Kitchener.
Yeah, so I love how
there's a lot to unpack there. Yeah. You think working with me is weird, with me coming up with weird ideas? Imagine.
They didn't mention it, but one of the ideas too is medals. To moms who have more than, I think it's like 3 kids or 5 kids or something like that. It's a very this is what
copper.
Nazis did too, by the way. Like they did medals.
It's weirdly close. Like they don't specify, but you do kind of get the message that they're only talking about white babies.
Right.
You kind of feel like
There's something that they want and don't want.
Yeah.
Especially JD Vance is when he's thinking about we need to have more babies. But yeah, I love how the reaction to that is just like, it's universally common sense of like, you want us to have more kids? Well, gee, make it more affordable for us to actually be able to do that. The cost of food needs to be down, or we need to earn more from our jobs, or you need to have more tax credits just in general, especially for the child tax credit is helpful.
You need to
There's
be
just,
able to
like,
have kids younger.
housing needs to be cheaper.
Yeah.
School shouldn't be so expensive so that you've got these massive loans. Like there's a lot of economic stuff that goes into having a kid, and if you're worried that you don't have the ability to afford a kid, you're not going to take that risk.
Dea and I waited a lot longer because we're going through our projects and taking on these big risks, and now we're trying when we're older. So we didn't have enough money before to try, and we put it off, and then it becomes way more expensive when it turns out you need help. And all of these things that becomes an enormous barrier, like the intervention type stuff, the IVF type stuff. It's
just why does it
universal
the
healthcare.
$5,000 for a new baby is good idea, right? Why is it that they're coming up with they're accidentally stumbling on good policies for the wrong reasons, right?
That's exactly the sort of policy too that they're that's when you say it's talking about white babies, they've been saying this about welfare queens and stuff, just having
we can't give away welfare because then people are just going to have more babies,
just going to have babies. It's wait, we want people to have babies, but there's one thing I learned that was disappointing that I don't know if it's totally confirmed, but it kind of tracks when you listen to the lyrics is Ace of Base is they were actually Nazis, and I saw the sign is supposed to be about the swastika and stuff, and but all that she wants is another baby. That other song that we all rocked out to, and whatever we were in, I guess I was probably in middle school, is about a gypsy inferior person in their view, just trying to get another baby so she can collect more welfare. And this is a common narrative. It's oh, now I have to hate this.
Right. I had no idea how terrible of a song that was.
It really has a great beat, so it's so funny to hear them talking about now we need to incentivize babies by giving people money. It's just direct cognitive dissonance about the opposite of what they've said for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that can justify why it makes sense in their view is that well, we're talking about two different types of people. Some people we want to do this and some people we don't.
Yeah. So just also want to make sure that everybody knows that we do know what works, and it's actually the Alaska dividend. This is an article from 2020 on Fox. Americans have fewer kids than they say they want. Alaska has a solution. So people, I suggest looking that up and reading it. But basically, they did a study, and it shows that even though if you look at Alaska's fertility rate, it's been going down since 1982, and so you would think that means that maybe the Alaska dividend has reduced fertility rates or something. But then you compare it to the rest of the country. You compare it to a similar state or a collection of a control Alaska state, made up of other states. And they find that the fertility rate has been going down less than, a control group would. So therefore, it's actually enabling parents to have more kids. And it's not that, they're not having more kids because if you have a kid, then that kid, gets the Alaska dividend every year. So it's not they're not doing it for the money. It's that these are parents who wanted to have kids and otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford it. But because a kid actually gets the dividend, then they feel that they can have kids, and then they do have kids because of it. So we do know that a small UBI actually does have this impact, that it enables parents who want to be parents to become parents. And so, if they're serious, if the Trump administration and JD Vance and all of them, if they're serious about increasing birth rates, then this should definitely be what they're talking about, but they're not.
But I also want to be really careful here not to create a direct link, a proportional, more money equals more babies, period. Because there's another thing that pops up in data all the time is that when you take communities that are very low income and struggling, and also certain cultures, but you also sometimes get a lot of babies. Like this brings us back to Catholicism, right? Or like like the baby boom that's always been going on in Africa, and it's like what you find in a lot of studies is that birth rates go down in some places where they're arguably like unsustainably high. When people like there's an element in there, and I don't actually know what all the factors are, but maybe it's people trying to build a community that's more resilient, having more people. I imagine that a basic income and financial security is less about more babies and more about the right amount of babies. Like if you have financial security,
and choosing
like they find a lot of people, like once they get financially secure, like these sorts of cultures, like the baby rate goes down.
Yeah.
It's like more about the like being able to choose how many babies you're gonna have based on things other than like survivalist mechanisms and needs. More about like what's a healthy amount of babies for us to have. Like what do we want? Like how many do we want to raise? How many does our society need to perpetuate itself?
Yeah, I'll throw it up here in the edited version, but the fertility rate is actually goes by like a U curve, and so at the far left of the curve, then at the top of this U is the lowest income. So this is also why less developed countries have just much higher fertility rates. It's your kids aren't surviving. You have to have like 7 kids in order to have like 3 kids grow to adulthood. Like
I'm sensing an Elon joke coming on the other side of the curve.
They're actually working, so like you're like having little workers to help out.
Yeah.
But so as the income goes up, then you have fewer and fewer kids. So like the middle class is kind of like having the lowest number of kids. This is also why in like more advanced countries, the fertility rates are down. And then the curve goes back up again when you have more money, because then you're actually able to afford to have more kids. That's why Elon Musk has like 50 of them or something, with we only know like 14 of them or 15 of them or something.
Yeah.
But
it becomes a privilege rather than a survival necessity.
So yeah. I think that you adjust the curve a little bit with basic income. So you're not as poor anymore. So then you're having access to more resources. Maybe you're less likely at the low end to have kids, but also you're uplifting the middle class who are not who do not have the finances to have kids.
Yeah, and where does that curve like go up too high? Where is the right end of the curve exist for like the the wannabe Genghis Khans in the world, like trying to just
But again, so there is the difference between if you can have all the money in the world and choose not to have a kid, so there all we want to make sure to do for those who really are focused on this subject, like if you think like Elon does that this is a civilizational imperative, then you should want to make sure that not a single parent or single would-be parent is deciding not to have a kid because they can't afford it. You have to make sure that everyone who wants to be able to have a kid can afford it. And then that's how you like maximize the the fertility rate such that that's like voluntary, like you don't want to do it where you're paying like $1 million for a kid, and then like parents are having kids that they don't even want just because they want to get rich or something.
Because they need $5,000.
Yeah, so it's like
that's
how are we?
It's so much more than that, though.
Like baby, right?
So
like
you need
in order to
UBI
raise a
and
kid, it's like $250,000 on average to go from 0 to 18 in the U.S. So if you're gonna financially incentivize this to the point where you can actually profit off of like having kids, then you've got to offer like $500,000 or something per kid, or like $1 million per kid, and that's like that's crazy to do that. Or you could do like the forced stuff, which is
you could do it over time in the form of universal healthcare and UBI. That's effectively what you're doing, is like saving them all.
Like that's the real solution: universal basic income and universal healthcare. Like that is how you actually do this in an optimal way.
To get back a little to my personal stuff, like we are trying now without these expensive mechanisms, and we still wouldn't have been able to try if we hadn't been in like a sort of morbidly privileged situation of Daya's father died, and we're using the insurance benefit to pay for the thing. But most people don't have someone to come in and cover IVF. IVF is tens of thousands of dollars, and most people there's not even a prayer of that. And then if you raise the money to do it once, that's like 20 grand or whatever. And if it doesn't work, it's got like a 35% odds of success. Then you're like, do we try again? Is it going to not work 3 times? Like now you're like gambling money you don't have, rolling the dice on a baby's life. And every single moment of it is infused with just sort of like terror and hope. And it's just this really, you go to these IVF places and the language on the pamphlets and the way that they talk to you is like very, you can tell they deal with people who are very traumatized by the whole situation. Like, and then you have to like, every time you have to wait a week to find out the next level of news. It's like, it's just, you're like sick to your stomach. And then you're like, is this hurting the potential kid? You know, there's so much to it where if we could just unload the burden of the financial to try the thing, and then the knowledge of like, am I going to be a parent who can take care of this kid? Like, will I have a baseline of support? It changes the whole game. And $5,000 once, you know, maybe helps, but it's just like so myopic.
There's just something very like what you're talking about is like, it's a very sort of personal experience that you're having. And so like the idea that the economics of it are like now being played with by somebody, it's like that's just like, oh, it'd be great to have more American babies. Like, just there's something very disgusting about like the kind of presumption there that like, you know, what we can do is we'll just start fucking around with people's fertility, right? Like,
yeah, or the way of going
anyway,
about it,
like,
the
yeah, it's horrible.
gender related stuff is being like, oh, hey, let's make sure that more women are at home and having
Yeah.
babies. So like, let's
Yeah.
actually make it so women aren't allowed to have jobs anymore. You know, like
Yeah.
what a solution that would be. Like,
Mhm.
that's dystopian. That's horrible. That's anti-human rights. That's like, it's fascist. That's like all these things that no one should be interested in. But
I
that's
guess
certainly a
it's kind of
solution.
like but you know, it's maybe like a good thing to explore of like, what is the difference between like a child tax credit and what they're talking about? Like, one seems like kind of reasonable and a good idea, and this sounds gross, right? Like, is it just because of who's talking about it? Like, I
Well,
don't
yeah,
think so. I think there's
that's
something
part of
more
it.
to it.
Yeah, and the framing. So, like we talked about this before, like during the campaign, and like so, I didn't like how Kamala Harris spoke about the $6,000 child tax credit that she was doing or she was offering, in that was only for the first year. That was basically a baby bonus. So she was saying that that was even after, that was in response to Vance saying that they were going to do $5,000. So like she saw that and said, oh, well, we're going to pay $6,000 instead of $5,000.
Right.
You know, that's going to be what you get for having a kid. And then you also get the tax credit. But she actually never really talked about that. She was only really talking about that first year $6,000 instead of talking about, you know, the monthly $300 per month.
Yeah.
And that's what she should have been talking about more, and certainly frames it better. You know, it's saying we're going to help afford, you know, a child from 0 to 18, and not just saying big number for baby. You know, like,
Yeah, and in both cases, it's a similar idea that is some money that helps, and like on the surface, it does something, but not enough. There is definitely an aspect of like just odious presentation. Like anyone who calls himself the king of anything, much less the king of fertilization, it's just the ickiest phrase I've ever heard. It's like it's like
yeah. And also,
not want to have a kid.
It's so expensive to, you know, the birthing process. How it's like what, $25,000 or $30,000 is like kind of average for costs of having a kid in the hospital, kind of thing, and
Yeah.
how many people that Medicaid makes that possible for.
Right. So $5,000 for us. I mean, I wouldn't turn it down. It would pay for essentially like 3 months of our healthcare premium. you know, essentially, and then we still have all the copays and everything on top of it, and a lot of other expenses for just going through the medical side of the process, and then the other tens of thousands of dollars that had to go into our case into the IVF, and then there's all of the raising of the baby and the support and everything. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
like
not enough to
if
get
you
me to
put
be like,
that money like in terms of just some kind of like offset for medical costs that are involved with uh, having a
Yeah.
baby.
It's like a coupon,
Like,
you know, you
yeah.
save a little bit of money.
Yeah,
I guess in a way,
but
it's
if it's like
consistent.
tied into like kind of like let's make healthcare more affordable, and here's a very specific way to do it,
Yeah.
like then yeah, that sounds okay. But then when you're like when you're saying here's your prize for having a baby, that's just I don't know.
I guess
even
it's,
if it's the same thing, like there's something there that's wrong.
I guess in a way it's consistent with what they've always been saying. Like
Sure,
they
yeah.
just change their mind on whether it's a good or a bad thing. They're like, you give people money to have babies, they'll have more babies.
Mhm.
And before they were like, which is bad because we don't want all these stupid babies we got to pay for. Now they're like, oh shit, we need more babies. Let's do the thing where we give people money and they have more babies. And we're all just numbers to them and whatever.
Yeah.
There's
Right, so
no like, discussion of where the money's coming from. Like they haven't got that far with it, right? Like how it's going to be funded.
I wanted to move on to the next thing. We got 15 minutes left. Still got some things to cover. And so just so everybody knows first, but we're going to talk about something that Amnesty International said recently. And so Amnesty International, its Wikipedia page, is focused on human rights, headquarters in the U.S. Organization has more than 10 million members and supporters around the world. The mission of the organization is to campaign for a world in which every person enjoys all of the human rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international human rights instruments. So this is a human rights focused organization. And here's what they said recently. This is from a news conference they gave on May 5th. And I suggest people, you can watch this whole clip if you want to, but just this part here at the 29-minute mark, I think is especially pertinent for our interests.
We are absolutely convinced that the social and economic divisions and chaos that could come with artificial intelligence, with the restructuring of the global economic system, must be a priority for all governments. In our opinions, an essential decision measure that must be taken in order to balance out the fields is in the form of a universal income. We do not believe that the economic situation as we are, as it is being drawn out, can be tackled simply through economic or trade measures. There must be social policy in place, including in the form of universal income.
Okay, so some additional context too. This news conference was about warning against the rise of authoritarianism around the world, and so I love that this got mentioned as part of that by a very large, very influential organization focused on human rights. And for those who support UBI, there's a lot of people out there who one of the reasons that they believe it's so important is even that they think that it is a human right, and it even matches the UN Declaration of Human Rights. So it's great to see Amnesty International do that.
Right? Article 25.
Yeah, I think so.
If people want to Google it, there's a direct mention of having an income for everybody in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we got the Pope and Amnesty International speaking up,
and the UN. I mean, that's
UBIs.
the Declaration of Human Rights is a UN thing, so they've got them.
Yeah, and there's debate whether where universal basic income. I mean, I would say that it that it does match that. But then if you're looking at, what does it actually call for? What does the declaration call for? Is it calling for a basic income? Like not necessarily, but a UBI fits. So there's debate there.
It's
but
heavily implied.
Clearly,
Like,
Amnesty has set their position down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, once you don't get much bigger in terms of like moral high ground than Amnesty International and the Pope, and like, I don't think.
What about
you got Martin Luther King, so you got
Michelle Obama. Like when they go low,
like,
we go high.
Right.
No, I like Michelle. She seems great.
Okay, so the next thing, and this is this is an endorsement that already existed, but it's great to see more of. So Robert Reich said recently in his Substack post dated May 6th, this was titled "Keep Demonstrating Against Trump, but Also for a Better Future." I do want to read this whole thing. It's not too long, but for those who have watched the show, previous episodes, we covered something that went viral on Tumblr that was basically the exact opposite of this. So, and we talked about why they were 100% wrong and how the opposite is correct. So it's great to see this actually be widely shared and from someone influential taking what I think is the proper take on this and calling for UBI too. So here's what it says. Friends, demonstrations against Trump are getting larger and louder. Fabulous. This is absolutely essential. But at some point, we'll need to demonstrate not just against Trump, but also for the America we want. Trump's regressive populism, cruel, tyrannical, bigoted, authoritarian, must be met by a bold, progressive populism that strengthens democracy and shares the wealth. We can't simply return to the path we were on before Trump. Even then, big money was taking over our democracy and siphoning off most of the economy's gains. Two of America's most respected political scientists, Professors Martin Gilens of Princeton and Benjamin Page of Northwestern University, analyzed 1,799 policy issues decided between 1981 and 2002. They found that the preferences of the average American appeared to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy. Instead, lawmakers responded to the demands of wealthy individuals, typically corporate executives and Wall Street moguls and big corporations, those with the most lobbying prowess and deepest pockets to bankroll campaigns. And when a majority of citizens disagrees with economic elites or with organized interests, they generally lose. Notably, Gilens and Page's research data was gathered before the Supreme Court opened the floodgates to big money and Citizens United. After that, the voices of typical Americans were entirely drowned. In the election cycle of 2016, which first delivered the White House to Trump, the richest 1/100th of 1% of Americans accounted for a record-breaking 40% of all campaign donations. By contrast, in 1980, the top 0.01% accounted for only 15% of all contributions. The direction we were heading was unsustainable. Even before Trump's first regime, trust in every major institution of society was plummeting, including Congress, the courts, corporations, Wall Street, universities, the legal establishment, and the media. The entire system seemed rigged for the benefit of the establishment, and in many ways, it was. The typical family's inflation-adjusted income had barely risen for decades. Most of the economy's gains had gone to the top. Wall Street got bailed out when its gambling addiction caused its enormous losses, but homeowners who were underwater did not. Nor did people who lost their jobs and savings. Not a single top Wall Street executive went to jail. A populist, anti-establishment revolution was inevitable, but it didn't have to be a tyrannical one. It didn't have to be regressive populism. Instead of putting the blame where it belonged on big corporations, Wall Street, and the billionaire class, Trump has blamed immigrants, the deep state, socialists, coastal elites, transgender people, DEI, and woke. How has Trump gotten away with this while giving the super rich large tax benefits and regulatory relief and surrounding himself, especially in the second term, with a record number of billionaires, including the richest person in the world? Largely because Democrats, with a notable exception of Bernie Sanders, who isn't even a Democrat, AOC and a handful of others could not and still cannot bring themselves to enunciate a progressive version of populism that puts the blame squarely where it belongs. Too many have been eating from the same campaign buffet as the Republicans and dare not criticize the hands that feed them. This has left Trump's regressive populism the only version of anti-establishment politics available to Americans. It's a tragedy. Anti-establishment fury remains at the heart of our politics, and for good reason. What would progressive populism entail? Strengthening democracy by busting up big corporations, stopping Wall Street's gambling, e.g. replicating the Glass-Steagall Act, getting big money out of politics, even if this requires amending the Constitution, requiring big corporations to share their profits with their average workers, strengthening unions, and raising taxes on the super wealthy to finance a universal basic income, Medicare for all, and paid family leave. Hopefully, demonstrations against Trump's regressive tyrannical populism will continue to grow, but we must also be demonstrating for a better future beyond Trump, one that strengthens democracy and works on behalf of all Americans rather than a privileged few. And then he followed that up the next week with this, another Substack blog, Trump's huge tariff hoax. And I'll just go down to the bottom for this one. And he said, he was talking about, tariffs and jobs and stuff. So even if it were possible to restore manufacturing and mining to America, even if we stopped foreign trade and forced American consumers to pay enormous sums for stuff made here, even if we filled the atmosphere with carbon, even if we prevented new technologies, including artificial intelligence, from replacing manufacturing workers and miners, the American working class would be no better off if their pay is still in the cellar. A return of manufacturing and mining jobs won't make Americans great again. Good paying jobs will. The easiest and best ways to raise the pay of working class Americans are to 1, strengthen unions, 2, raise the minimum wage, which hasn't been increased since 2009, 3, expand the earned income tax credit, a wage subsidy for lower income workers, and 4, institute a universal basic income. Will Trump do anything? No chance in hell.
I think he's kind of got those out of order, but yeah, a couple big takeaways for me. One, if you can find it, I saw in a presentation there, and I just know it's a chart that's floating around, like one of those studies. That's probably from one of the ones you mentioned, where there's a chart of like the likelihood of a piece of legislation happening on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, it's the percentage of the population that wants it to happen. And it's a flat line.
Yeah, that was what was referred to, and that was the Gillens and Page study.
It's at 30%. Like if 0 people want it, there's a 30% chance it'll happen. If 100% people want it, it's 30% chance it'll happen, and it's flat the whole way across. Like we don't fucking matter at all. Like so, it's not very democratic. Big takeaway 2 of 3 is I will never understand. People are still to this day like adamant against this, but the whole Bernie would have won thing to me has been like, obviously Bernie would have won. Like people are looking for populism and it didn't, it just happened to be that the only populism that was ever on offer was demagoguery, was like false populism, or he calls it regressive populism. And this whole like, they'll turn around and blame like, oh, all the Bernie voters that got disaffected didn't vote for Hillary, or she would have won, or whatever. It's like, are you implying that if Bernie had become the nominee, that all of the Hillary voters wouldn't have voted for him, or would they have voted blue no matter who, like they were telling everyone to do? And Bernie, other than Bernie, Yang was the one who brought over the most conservatives, but Bernie brought over more conservatives than any other Democrat. Like a lot. I remember it in 2016. I remember it maybe a little less in 2020. But of all of the people on the Democratic side, he was the one that most conservatives, Republicans, whatever, were okay with. They found him to be an honest guy. They found him to be speaking to them and caring about them. It just seems so goddamn obvious that like he wouldn't have just won. It would have been a blowout. Like this whole idea that we're trying to like barely win by 1% or 2% and like pretending it was like big either way. It reminds me of when I was a wrestler, and if I lost a match by one point and the ref had made a bad call and I was complaining about it, my coach would be like, "Shut up! You should have beat that guy by 10. Like, this shouldn't be an issue. You know, you shouldn't be trying to just squeak out ahead against like the worst opponent that we've ever seen." And then the last one, I mean, this kind of ties directly into like the whole Democratic Party is behaving just like the Netflixes and the things these days, where it's this big establishment that more and more has to hold on to its source of revenue and income, and plays it safe more and more and more and more, and doubles down on the like, we're not even gonna like talk about what we're for. We're gonna talk about how the other people are bad and gaslight the whole country into saying, no, you're crazy. The stock market's great. Things are going great. And it's just like all these industries that are playing it safe as they slowly erode and decay and die, you know, and somehow they never learn the lesson.
The dogs are barking.
And one final thing to end things up. This is a press release that just went out yesterday. This is from Mayors for Guaranteed Income. The title of the press release: 20 guaranteed income studies show increased employment, better financial stability, and other key benefits. Key quote here, I think, you know, the employment section: not a single pilot has shown decreased employment among recipients of guaranteed income, and the vast majority of pilots have shown increased rates of full-time employment. Considering how many people think that people will get lazy and work less if they have a basic income floor underneath them. Really, I mean, how many more do you need to see of this? And we've talked about the details of this, and, you know, like the Sam Altman pilot showed a small decrease in employment. It's not one of their pilots. It's a fair criticism to say, oh, well, you know, they're saying that 20 pilots show increased employment and nothing has shown decreased, but Sam Altman's pilots show decrease. And it's like, it was very small. And if you go into the details, you see why that was, and that's not a bad thing. But this is the kind of thing that should just put it to rest. I know it won't.
It raises a couple of questions for me if I'm trying to play the devil's advocate and understand. Like, when I see 200 cities have run guaranteed income pilots, 72 are affiliated with Mayors for Guaranteed Income, and here are the results from 20. I need like another thing that's like, these are the only 20 that have completed, or these are the only 20 we have. Like, because if I'm looking through the eyes of a skeptic, I'm like, oh, so did the other 52 pilots show that work decreased? Like, that has to be addressed somewhere, or else it can get, you know, dismissed.
I mean, yeah, sure.
These are just like cherry picked or something.
Right.
Yeah, I can see that argument being made, sure, that these are like cherry picked from all of them. But like, you know, the reality is that not all of these studies not all of these programs are studies, for one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And not all of these programs are done yet. You know, there's some that launched in 2020, and, you know, those are finished, and there's some that launched after that are finished. So there's like a small percentage of all of them that are actually completed and that did have research and data done, and that the researchers did have the time since then to create and publish these results. And so that's, you know, shrinks it down to a smaller number.
Is that like elucidated in the article, or is that just something, you know, like that's, if there was
I just know that
sentence to that effect in this article, then I would be like,
no, cool. This is just a press release. So, you know,
but
I don't think
at the very
it's,
least, you could say that the argument that if you wanted to say every time you do a basic income program, people will stop working, like, you can look at 20 of these that don't. So even if the other ones do, your argument still doesn't hold
disproves
water. Like, there's
And again, we already had a meta-analysis before this even started. You know, like, we already have decades of data and all of these pilots, and it all shows, if you look at all of them, the exact same thing, you know.
It disproves the opposite. If they just put it like, this is just a complaint I have in an ongoing way about the way we release data, like trying to say like, we have fully answered all of the possible questions about everything, but then like leaving out like addressing certain things. Like, that's kind of why I'm excited about the UBI data project. That is like, if it's a holistic, this is all the data that we have access to thing, then it's delivered more scientifically than kind of hand wavy. Like, it's trying to be bigger than maybe it is. you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's fair criticisms to make about this stuff, saying, oh, well, most of these pilots are like a year long. So, people are going to behave differently. And like, those are fair. But again, if you look at everything, if you look at all the pilots, no matter how long they are, like everything, then the data is clear about this, like not being something to be worried about. And I think it's good. The more of this, better. But, sure.
Right.
Good news to end on.
Yep. I think just as a general, like, best practices for the movement, it's like when you release information, don't under-inform to try to like convince people more. Anytime you're kind of like maybe tricking people a little to think something harder, you should step back and just give more information. So like it'll still support your point, even if it's only 95% of what you wanted, but you'll be credible. You won't get discounted. And I want to see more people release their data as if they're scientists, not activists,
Or also to kind of keep in mind like the bigger picture too, like, and not just looking at it from the scientific perspective. So there is that important, like we were annoyed when the Sam Altman payment came out because of like certain things that were left out of what they were talking about. And so, you can look at that from a scientific perspective of being like, they're just talking about data, but from another perspective, from a bigger picture perspective, you gotta say, well, if we're truly being honest here, then you've got to like bring in these other things that you didn't include and talk about to get like a better, wider understanding.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so I think
we've done it. I think
that's it for today.
Action-packed episode. Nice job, guys. And thanks to the Justin in the comments for both challenging us with your thoughts and also listening. He said good points to think about. And so it's like felt like a back and forth.
Yes.
That's good.
All right, thanks everybody. We keep trying to do this every 2 weeks, but like for the last few episodes, it's been every 3 weeks. Hopefully, the next one will be in 2 weeks. So hopefully, we will see you again 2 weeks, another Wednesday. And if you're watching this, edited version, thanks for watching us. Be sure to subscribe, give us a like, leave a reply, and we will see you next time. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye. Bye.